Hi, good afternoon, everybody. As you're loading in, we're going to go ahead and get started at about 5:35. Just give everybody a quick second to load in. Thanks. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kevin Polito. I'm the Neighborhood Affairs Director for the City of Miami Beach, and I'm going to be your host today on our virtual flood insurance forum. Thank you for taking the time to join us this evening to do this incredibly important forum. And it was special thanks to Mayor Stephen Miner, who you're going to be hearing from in just a moment. I want to go ahead and recognize our team that's also going to be speaking today. From the City of Miami Beach, you have our Chief Resiliency Officer, Miss Amy Knowles. We have our Vice Chair of the Public Information Committee, Scott Diffenderfer. Then we'll hear from Mr. Virgilio Perez and Dr. Bogendorf, as well as Miss Tracy Hartfed. And I apologize if I mispronounced any of your names, but I'm going to go quickly through the order. We're going to hear from Mayor Miner. Then we're going to have our Vice Chair walk us through some of his slides, and then you'll hear from the rest of our team. And then at the end, we're going to go ahead and have Q&A, where you'll have the opportunity to go ahead and ask some of the questions that you all may have on the forum. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mayor Stephen Miner. Mr. Mayor?
Kevin, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being here, and to the entire team that Kevin mentioned for putting this together. It's the first Mayor's Flood Insurance Forum that we're doing, and hopefully it'll be the first of many. And really, I'm committed, and our city is committed to continuing the legacy of proactive environmental stewardship. And this is a big part of that. Clean water, reliable sewers, effective flood prevention. These are absolute necessities. They're actually public safety imperatives, and they're essential components of the quality of life that we are constantly striving to improve in Miami Beach. My vision and our vision in Miami Beach is rooted in having solutions, pragmatic solutions that prioritize long-term resilience and sustainability. We hear those words a lot. They're not just buzzwords, though. And what they mean is fortifying our city to withstand the challenges that we face from natural disasters, from flooding, to make sure that we are in the best position and fortified. So the goal to tonight is to really have a conversation with our residents and the community about flood awareness and how flood insurance policies can help you recover more quickly after a storm event. And we have actually a really good agenda tonight. We have a resident's perspective, our Chief Resilience Officer, Amy Knowles, who's really an expert on this issue, and I'm very appreciative of the work that she and her team does on this. FEMA, flood mitigation expert to help provide information, and we're going to have a Q&A session. The bottom line is we have a lot to protect in Miami Beach. We have a $51 billion tax base. Floodwaters, as I mentioned, this is a public safety issue. Floodwaters can be dangerous to health and safety risk, whether you're driving or navigating through floodwaters on foot. And of course, we all know floodwaters can cause a tremendous amount of property damage. So we are in Miami Beach taking steps to reduce the risk of flooding and reduce other dangers associated with flooding. For example, we're upgrading our infrastructure, and that is a top priority. It has been even before I was elected mayor, upgrading our infrastructure, working with our public works department, with Joe Gomez and his team and our city manager, but upgrading our infrastructure to make sure that we can handle the larger rainstorms through our newly adopted stormwater master plan, which we did 2 commission meetings ago, our seawall action plan, broader neighborhood improvement and projects, and parks that can retain floodwater. And that actually is a priority for us. And our new parks for example, like Canopy Park, which can retain floodwater. Coastal dunes, and our coastal dune system is our biggest coastal defense from storm surge. And I have to give a shout out to our emergency management team that really works across internal departments throughout our city, external stakeholders and entities that help make sure that in the event of a hurricane or a major storm, that the safety and security of our residents, first and foremost, the health and safety of our residents, but also the property is our top priority. And the aftermath of a hurricane or severe weather event, getting residents back onto Miami Beach, businesses back up and running is a top priority, and we're well planned for that. But one way, and this is the point of this forum, one way for residents and our businesses to get back on their feet after a major storm event is to have an active flood insurance policy. It is important, and it could be literally, no pun intended, a lifesaver in the event of a major catastrophic storm. So today we're going to discuss all those issues and really break down what flood insurance policies are all about. And I'm looking forward to the show. And again, thank you to the entire team and to Amy for putting this together.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. And right before we go to our Vice Chair, Scott Diffenderfer, I do want to recognize our Deputy City Manager, Mr. Eric Carpenter. Thank you for joining us this evening, as well as Luis Atencio, our aide to Commissioner Joe Magazine. So I'm going to turn it over to Scott.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I've been on this committee since the inception in 2016. The committee was created to help the city of Miami Beach communicate with the community about flood risk, the importance of flood insurance, and steps the city and residents can take to protect themselves and their properties. We pass these communications on to the city through in-depth plans created every 3 years, as well as annual update reports. The creation of these plans and implementation of the communications they outline help our city to secure discounts on flood insurance through the FEMA Community Rating System program. Work that the city is doing related to updating building codes, communicating risk and preparation measures, providing technical and financial assistance, and other flood mitigation activities helps our eligible residents and businesses to receive a 25% discount on NFIP flood insurance premiums. We work really hard to maintain this rating, as we know that flood insurance is really expensive to maintain. The MB Magazine continues to be one of Miami Beach's most effective communications tools. The city includes tons of helpful information about flooding, hurricane preparation, king tides, and property and parking assistance. In 2021, we had an article about upcoming changes to flood insurance from FEMA with Risk Rating 2.0. Our winter edition, released this year, highlighted the application period for the Private Property Adaptation Program, which provides flood mitigation assistance to businesses and residents. Applications for this program closed on April 2nd. These magazines are beautifully designed and edited by our communications department. They're sent out to all residents every season. And this highlights the 10 steps to flood awareness. These steps include knowing your flood risk, knowing your flood insurance coverage, how to seek financial assistance, keeping storm drains clear, and other important resilience messages. The 10 steps are included across many of the communications from the city, including in our Miami Beach magazine, on the website, and within e-newsletters sent by the beach. You may have also seen the King Tide awareness shared by the city. Our committee created these materials to help our residents and businesses know how to respond to flooding, how they can prepare for it, and the dates during which flooding is more likely to occur with the high tides, especially the king tides. These materials are all available online and are shared often by our city staff. If you haven't signed up, you really should. The city provides extensive communications about upcoming storms and emergencies, flood advisories, flood mitigation, programming and opportunities, and lots of other useful information. You can sign up for text alerts by sending MB Alert to 888-777. You can also follow everything on social media at the handles at the bottom right of the screen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Scott. So we'll turn it over now to Miss Amy Knowles. Amy?
Great. Well, thank you so much, Scott, and for everyone for attending this evening, especially to Mayor Miner for really having this wonderful idea to host this forum. You know, flood insurance is top of mind for everyone, and so we're happy to have this thorough conversation. I also want to say hello to Carlos Gutierrez, who is a member of our committee, our PPI committee, as well as Ronald Starkman, who is a member of our newer resilience committee. So we really appreciate everyone's commitment. I'm going to talk a little bit about Miami Beach, tell you what we're doing about flood awareness, and then we'll transition on to more NFIP related items. So as we mentioned, you know, Miami Beach is highly valuable. We've got over $51 billion in taxable assessed value. We are the coastal barrier island that is beautiful to visit, but we also protect the mainland, and we are vulnerable. We're over 100 years old, and like many cities, we have aging infrastructure. And we do need to transition from a gravity-based system to a pumped-based stormwater system in order to be able to adapt over time. We are very densely built and populated. We have a lot of paved areas. We have a lot of people, which makes us really walkable and have a wonderful quality of life, but it leaves us a bit more challenged with sometimes the space we need for stormwater recharge. We're also very low in elevation. We're very close to sea level. We're an average of 4.5 feet. And as you can see from the graphic here, going from east on the beach side, west to the bay side, we're the highest on the east and we slope downwards towards the west. And that is, you know, from a gravity perspective, the way our city drains. We're also built on porous limestone, which means that we are affected by the groundwater underneath us as well. This next slide will really show you our FEMA flood map. You know, it's so important to note that Miami Beach was here before FEMA was created. And when FEMA was created and National Flood Insurance Program was developed, they came out with something called National Flood Insurance Rating Maps. And this map is important because it shows different zones that are called special flood hazard areas that flood insurance is required for federally backed mortgages and really encouraged for all. 93% of Miami Beach buildings are within special flood hazard areas. So all of the colors you see on here, except for yellow, you know, flood insurance is required, and again, encouraged for all. And what this means is that these areas have a 1% annual chance of experiencing a flood that exceeds base flood elevation. But we know those numbers really aren't perfect, and that's 1% a year. And in an average 30-year mortgage, that could increase to 26%. So, you know, it is a concern for our city, and it is important that we plan and build our resilience. Just by note, you know, the storm in Fort Lauderdale was almost a year ago to today. It was April 12th, and that was a 1,000-year storm. It produced a compound flood event similar to what we could see in 2070, with 3 feet of sea level rise, high tides, storm surge, and saturated ground. So it is important, you know, we don't see 25 inches of rainfall every day, but we certainly want to prepare as much as possible. These next few slides just are some new graphics that we have to help illustrate flood risk on Miami Beach and to help people sort of understand when we see these events happening. So here's our beautiful city surrounded by water. And just note here that the average tides are the same height as our groundwater, and these are our normal non-flooding conditions. On the next slide, you'll see our king tides. So this just means that the water levels go up maybe a foot, sometimes a little more, and our rising groundwaters go up as well at the same height. And so this can cause, you know, some overtopping of low-lying shorelines. It can cause the groundwater to push up. And this happens, you know, during those fall king tide conditions. The next slide shows things that happen on windy days, storm events, where the winds generate waves that can overtop the shoreline and cause flooding along the coast. And then the next slide illustrates rainfall. And rainfall, because of our low-lying elevation and high groundwater levels, large areas of paved surfaces, we can experience flooding during heavy precipitation events, where there's just rainfall with ponding and it has nowhere to drain. You know, we just had one recently on March 23rd, a very quick, heavy event that we experienced issues throughout our city. And then the next slide is storm surge during tropical winds and hurricanes. This can push large amounts of seawater inland into the city and in the mainland for miles needed. And then our next slide, this is what we call compound flooding, where it's not uncommon for several of these factors to occur at the same time or one right after another. And when this happens, it does amplify the effects of each individual flood source, and it can lead to greater impacts. So this is just important to note the type of flood awareness we need to have on our coastal barrier island. But we are doing so much to address this risk, and I did want to take this opportunity to share. It's very important for us to have a strong resilience strategy. Because of this strategy, we've saved 15 to 8% in the last 2 years on our city-owned asset insurance, run by our human resources team. So it's important to note that our proactiveness helps all of us on Miami Beach. So we're committed to using the best science and engineering that is changing very quickly, and as staff, we're committed to always using the best. We have a lot of guiding policies and plans for both public infrastructure and private. And third, we are implementing. We are one of those cities that are not just studying, we've done so much work and will continue. In the middle, you'll see our Resilient 305 strategy. It's important for us to think regionally, and I meet at least monthly with teams from Miami-Dade County and the city of Miami as we work to address these issues together. And we also really try to keep in mind the guiding principles that were outlined for us when we had an expert team come in 2018. We have to maintain our urgency, but also use incrementalism, make sure that we're pausing, looking at our different phases and evaluating. And we have to ensure transparency. We need a lot of two-way communication to make sure these projects are built well. We need to respect our ecological endowment. We have an aquatic preserve in our backyard, so we need to make sure to protect that. Financial pragmatism is important. This is very expensive. We've been awarded about $80 million in Resilience Florida grants, and that's important to continue to seek that kind of funding. There's many co-benefits to this. So as we work to reduce flood risk, we can do things like make wider sidewalks, add more resilient trees. We can add more bike lanes. All of that makes a better quality of life now. Our cultural identity, we have 14 historic districts, so that's important for us to keep that sense of place. Living with water, again, recognizing we're surrounded by water, and we need to learn how to live with it and to respect that it is just going to be around, and we just can't get rid of it completely. And then taking a long-term and regional perspective, again, keeping those partnerships is really important for us. Our next slide shows a little graphic, which I love, which illustrates the path of development for a city. All cities are developing and moving right along, and we all face shocks and stresses. Shocks being those big time events like a hurricane or a storm, and stresses, those slow moving things that really impact us day to day. And when we're hit with those, a city that's not prepared can really take a nosedive and take a very long time to rebound. But we want to be a resilient city that bounces back, but also bounces forward so that we're even better. So I won't go through all of these plans, but please know we work so hard as a city, from our recent stormwater master plan, down to our ongoing vulnerability assessment of our current assets, our resilience code, all the way down to our private property adaptation program and our dune management plan. Next slide. I want to talk a little bit about building public and private resilience, because we have to do both. The picture you see before you is Brittany Bay Park. It's a beautiful example of adapting a park to protect a neighborhood. The city pulled the seawall into the park at a much higher elevation. It's also a great seat and a bench for visitors. But we created this bioswale type area that can be flooded against the water. And we planted almost 600 mangroves and 500 feet of living shoreline, which stabilizes that shoreline as well for storm surge and water. So it's really important that we're building in a way we can enjoy it today, but offers that projection. However, 75% of Miami Beach is privately owned, and that is a picture of our floodplain manager, Mohsen Jarapur, who's on the line tonight and works so hard to make sure we're following FEMA rules. And that just shows how high new properties have to be built now to comply with these regulations, because we want to reduce that flood risk. I mentioned our stormwater master plan. If you have a chance, we'd love for you to check this out. But our city commission did approve 20 critical needs projects over the next 10 years at an estimated $95 million. And this complements holistic neighborhood improvement projects that will also address king tide flooding and sea level rise. And there's a variety of toolkit items that will be done to help push that forward. Our neighborhood improvement projects, we have done many of them in our city, and those are those more holistic projects. So we've completed about 4, and I love this before and after of Indian Creek Drive, because you can see that while before there was a retention wall, afterwards that wall kind of seamlessly blends into the public realm around that. So we've got new sidewalks, new grass, new walkways, but we've had to blend in order to accommodate and to reduce the flooding in that area. Next slide. I have to mention our beach and dune system and just remind everyone how much we can do when we put our minds to it. In the 1970s, we didn't have a beach system really. We had no dune system, and there was clearly a lot of vulnerability here. Now we have a much broader beach. We have our dune system that offers $20 million a year in protection, according to the Army Corps of Engineers. We did just complete a beach renourishment last year with the Army Corps of Engineers, and you may have noticed that we're doing dune restoration. So our city commission approved funding for us within the last 2 fiscal years to start to remove those invasive species and add in the natives, because they trap sand the best and are very important for protecting us and creating ecosystems. A little bit on seawalls. We do have 55 miles of seawalls. These are pictures I've personally taken from our Marine Patrol boat during king tide season. It's really important to protect ourselves using these seawalls, but 91% are privately owned. We do have a seawall ordinance that has a minimum elevation, and there are requirements for residents to bring those up to code. But we do have a new tool called the Private Seawall Elevation Tool, where residents can actually check out the height of their existing seawalls. Our public works staff did an amazing job creating this, and have a publicly available map. So again, it's a great tool for any waterfront property owners to utilize. Now, how to pay for all this? We do have a Fight the Flood private property adaptation program, which is a competitive grant-based program that can provide up to $20,000 in matching funds for flood risk assessments and mitigation improvements for private properties. This is to incentivize resilience action. We have about 48 new applications that just came in through this last cycle, and projects include everything from electrical and mechanical systems to permeable pavers, new drainage systems, seawalls, and even 2 properties were selected for home elevation. So this is a program we're very proud of. It's very, very rare. And we did tons of outreach from social media to postcards. We hosted 3 webinars. So we encourage you to spread the word and even apply if you'd like to have improvements on your own property. So with that, on our next area, I'm going to turn it over to Tracy Hartgrave. And thank you so much, Tracy, for joining. Our representative for FEMA actually became quite ill today with a stomach bug. And so Tracy is our city's insurance broker, also very knowledgeable about NFIP, and she's going to be presenting this slide.
Good afternoon, everyone. It looks like I'm not going to get a camera, but sorry about that. Thank you for allowing me to speak here. It's really important as a homeowner or a renter or a business owner in the city of Miami Beach to know your flood risks and know what your options are there to mitigate that. Flooding is the #1 natural disaster in the United States. Large storms and hurricanes have gone through communities, costing billions of dollars in recovery and restoration every year. The city of Miami Beach is a vulnerable community. Over the life of a typical 30-year mortgage, homes and businesses in these areas have a 26% or higher chance of flooding, which is 2.5 times greater than any chance of fire. And your city does a very good job of working with their resiliency in this long-term project, and to keep working on this. NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program, is one of the ways that the homeowners, renters, and business people of the city of Miami Beach can use to help mitigate some of their flood exposures. One of these things is buying insurance. NFIP was created in 1968. It's been around a while, and it struggled for a while when it was hit with some large floods, because as pointed out, it happens all the time. So every year, because this is a United States government federally funded program, just like our federal dollars, it has to go through authorization and be extended. It was just extended again on March the 23rd, 2024, so they can continue writing coverage. It usually goes through this. They're looking to do some long-term authorizations, but you have to get everybody to agree to that. NFIP and FEMA is also currently under pending litigation from 9 states going for issues of remapping to the CRS program that you guys get your discount on for the 25%. They've gone through and done some studies and removed that for some people, and that has caused some issues within those states. The next slide. FEMA is a mandatory program that is in place by the federal government to offer the citizens of the United States a way to purchase insurance when it's not offered through your regular insurance program. 90% of your homeowner's insurance, your renter's insurance does not provide flood insurance. 43% of homeowners don't actually know that they don't have flood insurance under their homeowner's policy. They do not have flood insurance under their homeowner's policy. Your business policy also on a standard form does not include flood. You have to buy it back. So NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program, is a way for an individual or a business to go buy insurance that they cannot purchase through the regular marketplace. There are also private insurance carriers out there that can offer NFIP. You can talk to your local insurance agent for whoever's writing your personal home or your business, and they should be able to point you in a good direction on getting to that. The next slide, please. NFIP's changing rates over the last few years, and the way that they have rated things has gone from 1968, where we had basically rating maps and pictures, as you know, as Amy showed you earlier, where they showed those pictures, that now we are more digital, we have a lot more access to information. So they've really dived deep now into finding information on rating these to make them the most accurate rating system that they can, so they are not losing money when there's a flood loss, and they're not gaining extra money at the same time. In some situations, this has caused some significant increases. Over the years, there's been about an 18% increase in your average flood cost while they have been reworking how they rate flood insurance. We're hoping that eventually they will get to a place that it all kind of levels out, but they've just instituted a new one this year. That new one this year, it's in addition to the 2.0 pricing. They will now be asking for condo associations to verify their values on the buildings every 3 years, but they are going to allow flood proofing credits for anything that's located in a B, C, D, or X, which not all of those will affect the city of Miami Beach, but you may have some X zones where if you do the flood proofing, which you can actually talk to your city about doing that, then they can offer you some discounts on that. The next slide. These are some of the things that they're looking for a flood. A flood is water rising or infiltrating the home. If your pipes break, that is not considered a flood. So these are some of the ways they look at where this water came from and how they're going to rate your coverage based on how near or far this water is. So do you have a levee? Is there a watershed? You're located on a barrier island. So those are definitely questions that they are going to be putting into their system to develop the rate for your insurance. There are benefits on the next slides, or the next 2 slides, of carrying flood insurance versus depending on a disaster assistance program. On the next slide, yeah, there you go. You'll see that there are, when you buy insurance, you know exactly how much you can claim, you know what your deductibles are, that most of the claims actually come from outside mapped areas. You don't have to pay it back because you're buying this as insurance. The policies are continuous until renewed. So when you renew it every year, you have a policy. You don't have to depend on it ending in 6 months from now, having to buy another one. And the flood insurance for homeowners reimburses up to $250,000 and up to $500,000 for businesses. That's for the building. They separate limits for the contents. The contents coverage is up to $100,000 for residents and $500,000 for businesses. If you were to suffer a loss and you did not have flood insurance, you would have to depend on disaster assistance. The thing that has to happen first on there is the president has to declare that there's a disaster. If that doesn't happen, you don't get any assistance. They don't always award assistance to everyone who applies, and most of the assistance you receive comes in the form of a loan. Those loans you could end up paying back just like your mortgage over the next 30 years. And the next slide, we say get prepared. Get prepared for a flood. Be prepared for this to happen and mitigate your chances of having a severe loss. Get flood insurance. Know your flood risk. Know what your flood rating is. Take a household inventory or a business inventory so you know what you lost if you do have a loss. And store important documents in places where they're not going to get wet. You can minimize these losses by elevating or anchoring utilities. You can clear debris from gutters. And if you elevate or move your furniture, if you're in a situation where you know that the water is going to be rising, that can help mitigate some of your losses. On the next few slides, they're just going through FEMA's information. They are definitely a fantastic resource. This is the definition of flood according to FEMA. They are available for homeowners, for renters, and for business owners. So everyone is able to go in, as long as you are in a community that is registered with FEMA, everyone is able to go get flood insurance. And on this final slide, there's a 30-day waiting period once you apply. They don't want you watching the water rise and go apply for insurance. So you do have a 30-day waiting period unless there is something that requires you to have it right this second. Banks will require this for loans every single time. And if they do a map revision, then you are notified immediately if you've built a levee, if they've built another dune in place to block water, then they will let you know. They will make changes to your policy, hopefully for the better. And I believe the final slide, oh, no, I didn't. Okay. These are, again, the additional limits for what you can purchase for residential and non-residential coverages. And then the next slide. There are some online resources through the federal for FEMA and a couple of other things that you can go through and look to ask some questions, get some help. Again, talk to your local insurance agency. The floodsmart.gov will give you all kinds of information. There is a resource on here for starting your recovery after a flood, and a resource especially important for your area is wind damage versus flood damage and what you need to know when filing a claim, because that could become a question. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. If there's any questions, please let me know.
Thank you so much, Tracy. So now we're going to go to Dr. Alec Boganov. I apologize if I mispronounced that. Doctor?
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Tracy. So I'm going to talk a little bit about reducing individual flood risk. So on the next slide, I do want to talk a little bit about a few items before we get into actual solutions. So the first is, as you've heard from the previous speakers, FEMA has launched what they're calling Risk Rating 2.0. It's a new way of rating flood insurance under the federal program. One of the challenges we're seeing that is because it's a new rollout, we're not necessarily seeing flood insurance reductions for private property interventions the way we have in the past. Previously, there had been very specific forms. You'd fill them out, you would get reductions. We're not seeing that same easy process right now. It doesn't mean that things aren't going to change and get better, because that FEMA is working towards, you know, a much more robust program. But just kind of stating right now, it's generally fairly challenging for an individual resident to get a reduction in flood insurance outside of really elevating. But what's really important to note is there's a lot of reasons why you would want to, as a private property owner, take interventions that would reduce your flood risk. The first thing to think about is insurance policies have deductibles. So that's the amount you're responsible for. And so by reducing the likelihood of flooding, it can and will save you money, because you won't have to pay that deductible. Or if there's damage that doesn't reach the total cost of the deductible, that comes out of pocket. Not to mention, there's a lot of costs associated with damage that aren't always covered by insurance. And one of those to think about is disruption, right? Being not able to use your house for a period of time, not just from a monetary standpoint, but a stress standpoint, thinking about children going to school, having to take them longer distances. So these are all things to consider, and really good reasons why you want to consider flood proofing or taking opportunities to reduce the flood risk for your property. So on the next slide, I want to introduce two terms for you, and this is passive versus active. Now, what's funny is for you think, oh, passive means I don't do anything, but passive for a flood barrier requires no human intervention. And so you think about it from the barrier perspective, basically, you don't have to do anything. You can be completely passive, and that flood barrier will take care of itself, even though that flood barrier itself may have some action with it. An active intervention is something that requires a human, which means when you're preparing for a storm or a rain event happens and you might not be home, you would have to do something to put out an intervention. So we always try to look for passive interventions first, which would make sure that regardless of whether you're home or not, what the time of the day is, there's an opportunity to protect your home. So let's walk through some solutions. The first set of solutions are really non-structural for rainfall. These are things that are fairly low cost, like creating a rain garden, directing the water around your home to a particular location, putting in a French drain, which will help drain more of the water into the ground. A rain barrel, believe it or not, rain barrels, which could then be used to irrigate your plants, can actually reduce flooding around your property by keeping that rainwater in a barrel. And again, it has secondary uses and benefits. And permeable pavers are great. The more area that you have where nature can naturally soak up water, will have less flooding, right? And that's a really important thing, is that if we can actually increase the amount of green space, open space, permeable space, we can actually reduce rainfall flooding for the entire community. On the next slide, we're going to talk about some resilient property improvements. These are solutions that will reduce the likelihood of damage to your property, equipment servicing property. So the first is flood resistant building materials. So if a property does flood, the building itself can there's not a lot that needs to be done to then kind of clean up after the fact. So if you're in a high risk area, some things you might look at are what type of flooring you have, what are the walls made out of, at what elevation are the electrical systems. Those are things that you can do to kind of really reduce the damage costs. You can also elevate electrical safety things. So that might be the electrical box servicing your house. You might want to elevate it. It might have been lower than, expected. Mechanical systems, elevating your HVAC systems. And then something you can also do is put in sanitary sewer backflow prevention, that if there is a large rain event, a large flood event, making sure that the sanitary sewer system doesn't back up into your private property. On the next slide, we're going to talk about temporary flood protection. And so these are active systems that require that reduce flood risk for multiple types of events. So these are things, in a lot of cases, you would have to put out yourself. There are some systems that are passive, that mean they self-deploy, but for the most part, they're things like temporary flood barriers or dams that you can put around a barrier. You can actually block a particular opening. So maybe that's something that goes over your doorway. You can also create a flood wall, a large scale flood wall that would protect around a broader property. One thing to note, that anytime you do this, you have to consult, both permitting staff and engineers to make sure that you're not doing things that could end up impacting your neighbors. On the next slide, we're going to talk about large scale structural modifications. So these are more expensive interventions, but can really solve things for the long term. So one are seawall improvements. Amy talked a little bit about the amazing program that the city has launched that allows you to see the height of your seawall. And seawall improvements are now a primary flood defense. They're becoming an important part of the flood defense of communities around the coast. Traditionally, they were about keeping the land from coming into the ocean, right? They were erosion control mechanisms. Now they're important flood control mechanisms as well. You can actually elevate the buildings. Miami Beach, again, has a freeboard ordinance that allows you to elevate properties up to a certain amount. And by doing that, you can reduce the flood risk. You will see a decrease in your flood insurance rates by elevating a building. You can wet flood proof. That's not as common in South Florida as other areas, but that allows the water to flow through the property. An example of that is, in some places where the first floor isn't necessarily habitable, you can't live in it, but if a flood comes, that whole property can flood, that first floor can flood. That is wet flood proofing. And then the last is dry flood proofing, and this is actually interventions that would stop the water from coming inside the property, inside the building itself. And so those are just an example of the many types of approaches you can take. There's a lot of them. Sometimes it's hard to know which ones, but the City of Miami Beach has a lot of great resources to help you learn about those different types of changes you can make to your property and how it will reduce your flood risk.
Great, thank you so much. So now at this time, we're going to go ahead and answer any questions that you may have. If you are participating via Zoom, you could click the raise your hand feature. If you're on a mobile device, there are 3 dots, and then you'll see the feature. It's under reactions, I believe, now on the iPhones. And then there's also a feature where you could go ahead and type in a question that you may have. So again, if you have any questions about this program, go ahead and click the raise your hand feature. If you're calling in today, you could go ahead and hit *9, and that way it would indicate that you have a question. We have a few people that typed in questions, so I'm going to go to them first and then go to our callers. I have 3 questions here, and really the first, these 2 are kind of similar, so I'm going to read it off to our panel here. Does a condo owner need flood insurance, or does the owner rely on the association for having flood insurance? For instance, who covers storm surge that makes a condominium uninhabitable due to elevators that may not be working, even though the owner's condo is well above the flood zone and itself is unaffected. Similar question, if I understand my building has coverage for lower floors, is it worthwhile to have a separate policy if you're on maybe a higher or a middle floor? So I'll turn that over to our panel, if you could help us with those questions.
Hi, this is Tracy Hartgrave answering. Yeah, I'm going to hit 1 and 3 because they're kind of the same answer. When you're up higher level like that, purchasing a flood insurance policy, I'm going to say the odds of water getting to the 5th floor means that something really bad has happened, right? Your condo association buys a flood insurance policy for common areas within the building, which includes the entrances, the elevators, all of those things. They would be covered under the condo insurance carrier's coverage. 1st and 2nd floor, I'd recommend you guys get your own coverage, because your stuff is from the walls in that you have to cover. So buying your own flood insurance is really important. But if you're on the 5th floor, I think you can get by without having NFIP coverage.
Thank you so much. Amy, I see you unmuted. I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything there.
Yes, thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Tracy. I just wanted to add, we do have some fact sheets on our website, and one of them does cover renters insurance. And one of the things we've learned is that renters can buy flood insurance coverage up to $100,000 to help protect your actual possessions, as Tracy mentioned. But always check with your flood insurance agent. We have a wonderful member on our committee, John Lee, and he has really pointed out to us that condo associations sometimes have different types of insurance policies and maybe purchasing additional types of insurance in addition to NFIP. So it is important to ask those questions of your actual management team as well.
And I would just add, it's always helpful if your insurance agent wants to review the policies of the condominium as well to kind of compare the coverages. And so most associations will have that available to you, and it's important to review the entire policy and not just kind of a fact sheet or information they might provide in email.
Thank you so much. So we have another question. Will there be sandbag distributions? So typically the city has distributed sandbags when there's a significant event such as a hurricane or a tropical storm that is coming in our area. In past storms, when there are resources available, there have been sandbag distributions. That question's more on the nature of the storm. And that's really an on-ground decision that typically occurs depending on the level of resource that is available. But again, I can tell you that in the past, in some storms, there have been sandbag distributed for Miami Beach residents. And I'll may just confirm with Amy if there's anything else you want to add on that. I know it's typically related to our storms.
Absolutely. I think our public works team does a pretty amazing job at handing those out. And there's always a lot of communications that lets people know.
Great. And now I have Daniel with your hand up. Daniel, if you could say your full name for us. It's gonna ask you to unmute. You might be muted.
All right, can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can. Hey.
Okay. So you talk about, let's say flood panels, because I've looked into it. If you're carrying insurance with a low deductible, I'm not sure the real benefit of a flood panel, other than the fact that you may, relieve yourself of some stress. But more importantly, if you do put in a flood panel and you raise the level of any potential opening, doorways, etc., things like that, and water does come into the home over the flood panel, how does it release? Now you got a pool in your house. I would think that would create more damage as opposed to naturally letting the water just subside.
Thank you, Daniel. And I'm gonna maybe somebody that might have some experience with flood panels that have been breached. So not sure if I see you unmuted there.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that, and if Amy wants to chime in after. So one of the ways you can generally think about it is that if the water breaches the flood panel, you're right, it's going to flood the home. It depends on how long it's at that elevation as well. If you don't have flood panels, let's say your flood panel's 3 feet, the water goes up to 5 feet. In reality, if you didn't have a flood panel, you might see 5 feet of flooding, right, in your house. With that panel, you may not even get up to the full height of the panel, depending on how long those floodwaters are above the panel. You are correct that you may require intervention to release that floodwaters once the flood has occurred. But the reality is the damage won't necessarily, it could potentially create more damage, but I think the benefits having them far outweigh any potential challenges with the water kind of sitting around for a long period of time. There are also things you can do to make sure that if water gets inside the home or past the flood barriers, you can get that water out. So one option is kind of actually having a pump that could pump the water out. And the other is there are devices that can allow the water to kind of flow out once the waters have receded.
Great, thank you so much. So our next question is in respect to increases on the flood insurance premiums. So we have somebody just wrote in the chat. I just received my flood insurance premium. Oh, sorry, Tracy. I'm gonna go ahead and mute you, and then we'll go ahead and come right back to you. So I just received my flood insurance premium, another 11% increase, same as last year. My flood insurance premium far exceeds my homeowner's insurance premium for only 1/3 of the coverage. How is this possible? So I think Tracy, you might be able to help us with that one.
Yes. Unfortunately, I believe it. I'm going to go back a little in time. In 2014 is when the NFIP discovered that they really were upside down on money, and they started making changes on how they rated things then. They've been putting those programs in place every couple of years with the additional changes going in place. That program federally limited their increases to 18% a year until your rate comes to where it actually should be rated for where you live. I know that that's not an answer that you probably want to hear, but that is the reason why it is going up annually. It will eventually get to a rate and stop. Unfortunately, it may not be within the next couple of years. You also may try looking at some private flood insurance. You should be able to talk to some of your local insurance agents. They could be able to, most of those come through Lloyd's of London, but they should be able to get through to some of them and see if you can't save a little money.
Great, thank you so much. So we're gonna go, our next question here is in respect to seawalls. So how does raising the seawall help mitigate flood waters if all seawalls are not raised simultaneously to the same height? I think Amy, you could probably help us with that.
Well, I'll certainly try. It's a very good question, and it's a tough question. So, you know, we're going to be a city in transition for a very long time, and the city first started requiring higher seawalls back in 2016 and further codified it last year and added some new triggers. For example, if a seawall is so low that it's being overtopped, it by code has to fix their seawall, and we'll send code enforcement out there and make it actually a requirement. But seawalls serve a couple of purposes. They do help, you know, with high tides, but they also help keep the ground and the property actually contained and keep it safe and keep it solid. So there's a couple different reasons for seawalls, and it is important to transition over time, but recognizing, you know, we're going to have a level of vulnerability until everybody does sort of raise those seawalls. So it's a very good question. And, you know, a lot of cities are grappling with this. I know Fort Lauderdale to the north is as well, because we just have so many privately owned seawalls. But that being said, it does help protect properties. And we want, you know, everybody to consider bringing their seawalls up to standards.
Thank you so much. So our next question is in respect to hurricane impact windows. How durable are hurricane impact windows? How likely is for one to break and flooding could occur that way? I'm going to turn over to Moshan. Mo?
Yes, hi. The impact window is really protecting against the wind. It's not basically sealed to protect against flooding. There is also some product lately out glazing that it can be both basically impact for wind and also protect against flooding. So not all impact window can be considered as flood-proofing glazing, but some they do. But you need to check with them, basically the manufacturer, make sure the shop drawing states so and is signed and sealed by engineer of records.
Great, thank you. And next up, we have, in respect to the crawl spaces, someone mentioned our first floor elevation as a major factor in determining our flood insurance premium. The way my elevation has been specified was the elevation of my crawl space, which is underneath only one bedroom. The surface of the crawl space is underground, therefore my premium is higher. Risk rating 2.0 did not address this problem and had no effect on my premium. I think that's one that Tracy could help us with.
Yes, Jack, you are correct that risk rating 2.0 did not address that at this point. That was something that was brought up back in the earlier changes. They did make some adjustments in how they rated crawl spaces. Unfortunately, that crawl space is considered your lowest level of elevation on that building, so they're rating you for that. There are a couple of things that you can do to maybe make some changes to help that some. You can check how much venting you're actually needed in that crawl space to make sure if the water comes in, it has some place to go back out instead of rise underneath the house. So there are some ways to reduce that you're getting due to the crawl space issue.
Great, thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
So we're gonna go next. We actually have somebody with their hand up. Adolon. I apologize for mispronouncing that. If you could state your full name for us.
Hi, my name's Adiola. Thank you guys for putting this together. I just wanted to follow up on that hurricane impact window question. So I'm pretty new to the beach and, hurricane zones. And, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly. I understand that hurricane windows are to protect from the wind, but I'm also assuming they're to protect from like high impact debris or whatever, like breaking the windows. And so I guess my question is, how likely is that to happen, that, a hurricane impact window would break and therefore like the property would be like open to the elements?
Thank you. So I'm going to ask Mo if you could help us with that. And I think ultimately every property is different, and the engineering for each of those properties would be different. But Mo, maybe you could walk us through some of the safeguards that are in place and some of the minimum standards that are in place.
Sure. So yes, basically the storm is different, and normally there is a cap as far as those protect against of the window and against of basically debris that contacting with them. But however, related to really flood, those impact window, as I mentioned before, they are not sealed for flooding. So there is a chance when let's say we have 1 or 2 feet or maybe more than that flood water. So will be a penetration around basically through the seepage of the window. Water get to the space. So that's why I said earlier that not all impact window the same time it's dry flood proofing material. There is some out there that, as I said, it needs to be checked by engineer or also manufacturer with the shop drawings.
Great, thank you so much. Amy, if you could just give us on the PPA program and where we are right now and the next steps for those pending approvals.
Yes, absolutely. So our private property adaptation program is a new program. It's an innovative program. It is not built for speed. This is a program that we integrated in our current staffing levels. And we've had to be very diligent. This is public funds. And so some of the major steps have been first, a application process. The applications have to be verified and validated through many departments such as building and code. And then it has to essentially receive an assessment. So we did go through a procurement process and we selected Versaga. Dr. Bogdanov spoke tonight to go ahead and take a look at the properties and understand what would be the best recommendations for those properties, knowing that all properties are very different. It's not as simple as just, for example, putting a new window in. Every property has very specific needs when it comes to flooding. After that assessment was completed, the reports were then prepared and delivered to the applicants. And then we even had a launch at the Miami Beach, the Botanical Garden, so that we could explain the next steps, which would be the homeowners to obtain different quotes and to submit those quotes to us and to sign actual agreements that had to be reviewed, by our city's attorney's office to make sure those are done really well. So, thank you for any patience and for any participants on. We do think it will get faster with the next cycle. But again, it's that process of being careful, and also it's very voluntary, and it's up to that homeowner to go ahead and get those quotes and to get the information in. But we are really excited about the next phase of the process, and we're seeing a lot of interest in that.
Thank you, Amy. And just a follow up there, is it only for single family homes?
It's not. It is for commercial properties as well, and we had 3 actually apply this time. We went door to door and invited them to apply, and it's also for multifamily residential.
Thank you. And the new flood assistance program, when will that open for 2025? Somebody has understanding that for 2024, it had closed on April 2nd. So are there plans for the 2025 at this time?
We will announce it as soon as we have dates, but you can also go to www.mbrisingabove.com/PPA and sign up for updates on the program as well.
Thank you. And what can I tell my condo association? Should we discuss with the city or their insurance agent if they live on Belle Isle? I think that's for the group here. Maybe, I'm not sure if Tracy, you could help us with that one. That one.
Yeah, I can start it. I would actually send your condo association an email or a handwritten note requesting a copy of the condo association's guidelines and provisions and a copy of the insurance that they currently carry for the common areas in the buildings. You can take that to your own personal agent. It does not have to be the condo's agent. It pretty much any personal agent within the Miami-Dade area should be able to help you with flood insurance, whether it be through the National Flood Insurance Program or through a private carrier to do that. And they can review it for you too.
Great. Thank you. So during king tide, water penetrates through storm drains and not through the ground. Why is the water not penetrating the actual ground is one of our questions. I think maybe Mo or Amy, if you could help us with the storm drains and the water penetration.
Well, I believe with the storm drains, that's such a direct conduit for the water to come straight up. So whether it's coming in, from the actual tides, or the storm drains, if they're not, and the stormwater pipes, if they're not completely sealed, as the groundwater rises, the water goes right into those pipes. And so I think it's just a very quick way for the water to come up. We do see it coming up in other areas, in parks and private property, where you'll see, for example, Flamingo Park. There's some really low-lying areas that have ponding as well. So I think it's a virtue of water finding its own level.
Thank you. And with sea level rise expected to rise by 6 feet by 2100, the question is, what is the hope for Miami Beach where seawalls are unable to provide a solution due to porous limestone bedrock?
Well, I would say that 2100 is really far away, and our city is taking the approach of incremental adaptation. We're designing and really trying to time these different requirements with the lifespan of the asset. So it is unlikely that a seawall would be around for another 80 to 100 years. It would be likely that an owner would have to upgrade it again. It has an expended lifespan of about 30 to 50 years or so. So really what we're trying to do is time the lifespan of the asset with the risk of sea level rise and make sure that that's timed properly as well.
Thank you. And I have Diana with your hand up. Diana, if you could say your full name for us.
Diana Oman. I live
Diana.
I live at 2457 Collins Avenue. And unfortunately, the Indian Creek project ended at 26th Street. So when we had that major rain event and flood event on March 23rd, all of us were instructed to move our cars out of our garage because of flooding from the canal. And surely I can tell you that one of our owners on the 10th floor took a video of water coming right out of the canal into the street. It did not quite make it to our driveway. And it is a downward sloping driveway because we park underground. So I'm wondering, what is it going to take, or how do we complete that seawall from 26th on clear on around Lake Panacote and get this water contained from that canal?
Thank you, Diana. And Amy, I'm not sure, if you have the latest update on that project? I know Public Works, I believe, has it in the works, but maybe you know a little more than I do.
Yeah, we would really have to check in with Public Works on that one specifically. So if we can get your contact information, we can go ahead and we can have them contact you.
Yeah, and I have Diana's information. So Diana, we'll connect with you probably early tomorrow with our Public Works team and get you an update on where, because I know that one has been a long time coming. And like you said, you've had other upgrades already in the area, and we're kind of waiting on this one there. So I have somebody in the chat. We have will there be Miami Beach code expectations for all condo owners to replace their doors, windows to hurricane high impact materials by a certain time or date, or is it up to the individual owners if they will upgrade to high impact hurricane protections? I think I'll turn that over to Mo.
Yes, so there is no law that you have to basically replace them, but this can be done replaced by yourself. But however, if you do a certain renovation, then you might need, based on the law, you have to change it to the impact window and doors, or you're replacing the window that it has to be or door, it has to be impact window. But there is no law that you have to basically change it to the impact window. However, as you know, we do have the program Miami-Dade County 4-year certification, that engineer of record, he will basically do inspection based on hired by owner, and they look at if it is damage to that particular door or window that it needs to be replaced.
Great, thank you, Mo. And then also and correct me if I'm wrong, but with the condo boards themselves, well, there's no law. If a condo boards decides to do a special assessment for these upgrades, that is something that can be done if the board, votes on that. Is that correct, Mo?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so I have Daniel. We're going to come back for a follow-up question. Daniel, you're muted. Let's try.
Yeah, I asked the question. I'm just trying to understand the logic of spending money on flood panels. If you carry flood insurance, and let's assume your flood insurance has $1,000 deductible, and let's assume further that it costs you $35,000 to put in flood panels that raises your house, let's say, to a 10-foot elevation. Why would you, what is the logic, other than maybe some aggravation, what is the logic to spend the money on the $35,000 for flood panels when you could do nothing and just make a claim on your flood insurance and your out of pocket is $1,000?
Thank you, Daniel. And let's turn it over to the panel, see if they've had experience with that. I think ultimately it's just going to be another tool in the tool belt, and it's going to be probably personal preference on which route you'd want to go. But I'll turn it over to Tracy.
Hi, Daniel. One of the reasons that you would probably want to do this is because if you ever have a flood that is not insured by the National Flood Insurance Program and you did apply for assistance and received it, from that point forward, you are required to obtain and maintain flood insurance coverage for the life of that property. So you could be stopping that inevitable from happening, or you could reduce your future flood premiums because you've now installed this flood panel that is going to reduce your risk and should bring some of your premiums down on the flood insurance that you may have to buy because you've had an incident before.
Great, thank you so much.
Tracy, could you also add maybe about the challenges with repetitive losses as well if you flood multiple times?
I can, yes. NFIP, even the federal government comes to a point to where they go, okay, this property has flooded enough times that, even we have a problem with it, and they will start actually requiring you to do something to mitigate the loss, whether it be work with your city to try to get a federal grant, whether it be pulling it out of NFIP and actually having to go straight to FEMA to get your insurance, which is much higher than NFIP, because you can't get it anywhere else because you keep having repetitive losses.
And also, I can add this.
Sorry, go ahead, Mo.
So I can add this. Really, the flood barrier is for flood panels and flood barrier is designed for the non-residential building. But at the same time, we use the sandbag to protect the property. That flood barrier also the same thing. It's temporary. It's not permanent. So even though you will not get discount for towards the flood insurance, but help you to basically prevent water to your building.
Thank you. So those are the different, ways. I hope that answers your question. So our last question in the chat, and if anyone has their hand up, you could go ahead and raise your hand at this time. But if not, this may be our last one. It's with respect to backflow protections. So if you put a backflow protection on the storm drain pipes, what protection, if at all, would that create? Is that a viable, option, or backflow preventers? I'm not sure, Mo, sorry to put you on the spot. Would you have any maybe experience with those backflow or?
So a backflow protection basically, as Alex said, that you don't want the water, basically the sewer to get to your property, and so backflow preventer actually is part of the code requirement based on building code. So it protect that the storm water not to get to the building, and that's why you need to really need that. So that's as I said, that's part of the UN code requirements.
Great, thank you so much. So with that, we don't have any other questions. I'm going to point to the chat. Noel put Noel put in the chat the website where you could visit to find more about our flood awareness. And I'll turn it over to Amy maybe for some final thoughts, and then we'll go ahead and end tonight's session.
Sure. Well, I just really wanted to, number one, thank you, the residents, for coming out and listening and asking these good questions. I think we're all really aware of these flood insurance cost increases. We're experiencing them as well. And this is a great time to come together and talk about not only reducing our risk, but is there anything we can do to help reduce, take actions for our own properties to help reduce that effort. So we encourage you to contact your flood insurance agents. We encourage you to contact us as well. And just a huge thank you for participating. And of course, to our Miami Beach Mayor, Stephen Minor, for this wonderful idea. Obviously, it was needed. We had a lot of participants, a lot of questions in this area, and to all of our staff for really giving us today, and our extended staff, our experts that have helped as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, and have a great night.